kind of made a soap about it. Another thing was that I dressed up as a club rep and did Club 66 to 98, which was the youngest and the oldest, between the youngest and the oldest residents, and we went to Southend for the day. So different events, different things that I think really informed me of realizing how important it is to kind of work on the job and use your intuition and be very process led. And a project that then came after that, maybe a year and a half after, was I wanted to work in a hairdresser's, or not, make work in a hairdresser's. And as a queer person, I was very drawn to Open Barbers, which is a queer hairdressers in London that is trans-led. And I was in residence there for 5 months. And we and before that 5 months, actually, we had 3 weeks together where we really crafted the project together. And it was like, well, what do they want out of this, and what could I want out of it? And we decided that it was about spending time with the clients and creating a new type of lookbook that was about the actual hair rather than people's gender, because really, why does gender have a haircut? So I would sit in the salon and draw people, and I would just draw their hair, and sometimes I'd be sat there for like 15 minutes drawing, sometimes it'd be an hour, and there'd be these quite big conversations that had happened, and then afterwards I'd get the person to name their haircut with maybe something around what we've spoken about during those times. And I think these were like 2 big projects that really I took hold of and led with other people. And yeah, it was just a really good learning curve for me, those 2 projects. So yeah.
Thanks, Amy. It's interesting that you talk about self-directed. I think it's kind of like it's the first time it's been mentioned in the series so far. As in, you know, I'm presuming it's a project that you've actually conceived yourself and gone out and made to happen. So there's not been an arts organisation necessarily involved in that process. And I think that's kind of something interesting, perhaps for cohort to sort of think about, is this idea of not necessarily waiting for projects to come your way, or not necessarily waiting for, you know, you to get a successful application through, but sometimes it's, you know, important to initiate your own projects and get them off the ground. And it's also really interesting, and thanks for sharing that you describe those as the 2 most important projects you've done, which is also an interesting thing perhaps to pick up on. Thanks ever so much, Amy. Jessica, same question to you. So, you know, invitation for you to describe your own practice and tell us something about your practice, touching on how that has developed over time in terms of working with people and working collaboratively with groups and communities.
Yeah, so I think it's quite difficult going after that wonderful speech by Amy, but very like similarly, I like to work with groups and explore like different methods of co-direction and collaborative working, and that's so very similar again to Amy. I've found that self-directed projects have been the biggest learning curves for me. So one that I wanted to talk about today was called This Garden of Ours. So I did have partner organisations, but I was the lead on that project, and we had 25, like a collective of 25 people with lived experience of migration in Manchester, and we had a 6-month workshop schedule in natural spaces. So we tried all different kinds of art workshops. We did pottery in a garden in Salford. We were in alleyways in Levenshulme that a group there had like sort of turned into this amazing like garden extravaganza where there was like courgettes growing out of bathtubs, and it was great. So we had 6 months of doing this and building relationships and just trying out different things, and then that all the work went into an exhibition at Manchester Museum, where there was then a full program of like talks and events and music and things like that as part of Journeys Festival. But what I really learned from working with that group was that actually there is no I don't like to make this distinction between like high art and low art, which I think was mentioned before, and that actually there isn't a distinction between me as a lead artist and the artists that took part as part of the group. And so one thing that I've tried to take forward from that is discussing at the start of the project, like, what do we want to be called, and if people are comfortable with being called an artist, then the participants also get named as an artist. If people are not comfortable with that, maybe we come up with a different name. But that was the first, I think that was the first project that I worked on, self-directed, where I was like, oh, I get it now, and this is what I want to do. I want to create these really embodied experiences for people to relate to each other, but also to relate to the environment that we're in, especially as people with experience of migration. And it's developed from there, really, to do lots of similar projects. And I've started exploring my role more as a curator, because I found that actually working with people who might not call themselves an artist, but on art projects, I've been stepping more into a curator kind of role. So that's where I'm at the minute.
Thank you, Jessica. I think that's a really interesting point as well, that you're talking about negotiating with the people that are in the group, how they want to be named as participants within the group. And I mean, I know of some of your work as well, and some, looking at one of the websites that you have, it's kind of, you don't know who's a participant because they're named as artists, and there seems to be an equality. So, I mean, one of the ones I looked at, I wasn't even aware who the lead artist was. So I find that really interesting, that everybody is given this kind of the equal, if you like, status within the project, which, is absolutely right, in my opinion. But it's really interesting that your projects start with that at the beginning, so having those conversations. And of course, I guess sometimes those conversations can be quite, well, I suppose challenging, because using that word artist can be quite a daunting thing. So I guess you've got to kind of express or talk about that too. That's great. Thank you so much, Jessica. I'll move on to you next, Chris, if that's okay. So Chris, again, same to you. How would you describe your practice? And if you could tell us something about your practice, touching on how you work with people and communities.
Thank you, Kerry. I've got some notes here in case I missed stuff, because there's a lot of things that I've been through. From the beginning, I wanted to try and become integral to the area that I was working in and living, which is the Brookfield estate. I wanted to be practically useful. I wanted to be caring. It's a big thing for me. And I wanted to be in service to them. I was way before I went to university and further education, I was a carpenter and flower bagger and all sorts of grass cutty rubbish jobs. So I'd had a fair amount of kind of life, worked in hotels for a long time. And I was politically a socialist, so that fed a great deal into where I was coming from. The practice was focused around a manifesto that I wrote in partnership with a local lady, a nearby neighbour called George. And she first approached me in '94. I'd kind of was halfway through my year at uni at UCLan at Preston, doing fine art. And she'd heard that I was an artist, and she came to me thinking that I could write a song for her for some reason. This was back in the day, and she was just about to become, there's people who used to go around taking their clothes off to music at kind of parties and stuff. Something Gram, I can't remember what they were called now, but she wanted a piece of music, so she came to me. And I didn't know anything about music, but we kind of put something together, and we got talking, and I started to say to her about, I'm doing this degree, I've always been a painter, I want to work with people locally, I'm interested in the area, it's a really interesting place. She'd been there for quite a few years, and we wrote a manifesto. I was into the situationists at the time. So yeah, I was into manifestos. And I have the manifesto here. I had things like the project had to be in place for at least 15 years, was in the manifesto. I had to say hello to everybody that I met on the estate, and still do that. Some people have been blanking me for like 20 years, but I say hello to everybody still. I couldn't have sex with anybody locally. That was one of George's little funny moments, but that was in the manifesto. I couldn't earn over 17 grand a year, which at the time I laughed, you know, I was a student. But yeah, that became interesting once I got married. We had to adopt a diverse range of creative media. That was a big thing for George, that it had to be quite broad. So I had to kind of spread myself. And we had to be reactionary. That was a word that she used. And the people were more important than the art. That was a big thing on the manifesto. So from that basis, from that document, first couple of years, I was in uni. I was doing kind of explorational stuff, looking for creative interventions. I had a citizen. I was skin. I did a citizens newspaper, 1p a penny newspaper thing, and I was kind of writing messages in the papers and doing little drawings and putting them through people's letterboxes. Then I got sacked from that. I used to go around with empty cameras, pretending to take pictures of people and pictures of the landscape. And people used to just kind of stop me and say, you know, why are you taking pictures of Brookfield? And I got into the idea of vehicles that would stimulate conversation, which eventually manifested into, I used to cement tables into my front garden that we used to kind of write conversations on with local kids. And then I'd kind of exhibit them in galleries when I was interested in exhibiting in galleries, no more. And then I realized I was just interested in the conversation, and I became an activist, basically. The first major project I got involved with was that somebody got run over on the main road that runs through the estate, and we had a traffic campaign. So I got involved with that, and then just started helping people, a community development worker, I guess. But every now and then kind of creative stuff rose from that. And I would say that having been reactive for the last kind of 25 years, and become integral, I used to keep archives and records of stuff I did, but then got tired of doing that and didn't want to show it to anybody anyway. But one of the records I had when it stopped in about 98, at that point, 16 people had died that I'd worked with locally, and 83 people had been born. So that was quite an interesting stat. I would say, having gone from that reactive mode over the last 12 months, I've been talking to other activists in Preston, and we've been reflecting on change and lack of change, and socially things going backwards on our estates. So we're thinking forward a bit more now, and we're looking at kind of retrofit projects, care cooperatives that will bring big change. Most of the creative work over the last 25 years has been very small and intimate and personal kind of changes for people. But if you were to ask me what's changed on the estate, I would say over that period, nothing has changed. We still live in an area of deprivation. And do we want areas of deprivation? Why do we have areas of deprivation? Let's get rid of the areas of deprivation. So that for the next 20 years, I'm going to aim to do that.
Thanks, Chris. I'm curious to know if we can have a look at the manifesto, because that seems also pertinent to today, and even the not to earn more than 17,000, because I think that's still quite a high target for many artists
Yes.
that are freelancing. So if that was written in 1994, I think that kind of is reflective of something there that's not happening within the arts community for sure.
I can put it in the chat if you want. I can.
That would be great. That would be fantastic. Thank you. And it's also interesting to hear you talk about, you know, when you were writing that, thinking that you were looking at being on the estate or working on the estate for 15 years. And I know when we set up In Situ, we also did the same, had that same conversation that we need to be here for 20 years, or saying that I'm no longer part of In Situ, but In Situ is still there, and Paul is still with In Situ. So yeah, I think it's those long-term look-ins as well, that if you're embedded are kind of important. It's how long you want to be in those communities to actually see change. But it is also upsetting to hear that after all of those years, that the estate is still in the same situation. And how do we actually get estates and areas that are constantly being classed as, you know, areas of multiple deprivation? How does that change? So thank you for those thought-provoking points, Chris. Gemma, over to you for the same question. So would you be so kind as to describe your own practice and then tell us something about your practice, touching upon how that's developed over time and how you work with communities and groups?
Okay, so thanks. Yeah, so I'm a sound artist, and I really came to sound art for DJing back in the late 90s really. So I developed from DJing into sound art because it's slightly more mature. So I think one of the projects that I want to talk about today is really the toilet project. I got involved in a project developed by University of Sheffield around exploring toilets and who can use them and who can't, how they can be a place of exclusion. Through this week, I developed this soundscape, interviewing various groups about the difficulties they have around accessing toilets. So, for example, disabled people, trans people, female truckers. So I work quite a wide range of different groups. So the soundscape ended up being quite long-winded. It was probably about 10 minutes long, and I sent recording devices to different groups. So it was actually quite, it was sort of using basic technology. So I would describe it as being slightly a bit quirky, a bit messy, quite non-linear. And the interesting thing was that we then worked with a film company to develop a short animation about a subject. So they wanted to shorten everything to 3 or 4 minutes long, and they ended up re-recording a lot of the narratives and actually cherry picking different groups. So instead of having 10 different voices, there were only 4 different voices. Now each sort of part of a project, I think, has its place. So apparently my soundscape is still often used, part of it is used in talks, but equally the shortened film is also being used as well. So I found that really quite interesting, the different sort of approaches people have. And in some ways, my soundscape was more inclusive, and it gave people more opportunity to actually collaborate because they were using their own, say, iPhones or digital recorders that we provided. The other project that I wanted to talk about was one of the more recent projects working very differently. So it was working with a group of learning disabled people based on a farm to create some sort of sound-based piece. It was very organic in nature, so we didn't really have a concrete idea of what we wanted to do. So it was very much led by participants, I guess is the right word, but I would describe it as, in a way, leading from behind. So I was technically the lead, or it was very, very much about collaboration and making sure that everybody could take part in a meaningful way. So, and we produced some really great work. So we did a piece about Halloween because they were absolutely love Halloween, and then we did another piece where they were reflecting upon their work on the farm and their specific set of skills and the way that they interact with animals, which was quite unique. I mean, I personally learned those that I didn't know about animal care. So that was a really interesting collaboration.
Lovely, thanks, Gemma. It's interesting that you've chosen two. I mean, I love the toilet project, I have to say. I think that's great. But the two projects, and one is where the artist is addressing something that they've already identified as an issue. So the toilet project being all around equality or lack of equality when it comes to access to toilets. And it's a funny one because I often hear conversations about toilets, and also the other issue that I was working with a group of people, or invited to sort of take part in some conversations with some people who have ME, so and suffer from chronic fatigue syndromes, and they were saying they often get flack for going into the disabled toilet because they don't look disabled. So there is definitely sort of something to be said about how we perceive toilets, and there's something that's so basic that we just take for granted, but actually there are equality issues for sure. But it's interesting that that idea of identifying an issue as an artist and then doing a piece of work. And also I'm very curious about what you said about how that work has then been taken on another life, which doesn't include all of the voices. So that kind of brings up the question, how do we how do we, or can we have any kind of influence over work once we've completed it? If it goes into other people's hands, what happens to it then? And of course, the other one, the farm project, where you were process-led and being led with the participants, so not knowing what you were going to do, but learning and sharing with the participants and growing that together. So I think that's really interesting that there are these sort of two approaches to social practice, both including people and both including dialogue and talking. So thank you for sharing those with us. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next question, and Jessica, I'm going to ask you I'm going to go around my little circle. So the next question comes to you, Jessica. What different kinds of learning, knowledge and skill sharing and lived experience have fed into the development of your practice? So this can include any arts training to the way that you've acquired other knowledge and skills as your practice has developed.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure how to answer this question at first, because I feel like as artists, as art practitioners, I almost feel like all of our life experiences feeds into our practice. And so in a way, like, I think because I grew up in Oldham, which is in North Manchester, and our art lessons kind of consisted of like copying a Picasso drawing and everyone fighting over the black pencil, the one black pencil that there was in the class to like do your outlines. And so, you know, in a way, like that's fed into my practice, that kind of that stifling of creativity. And then I then thought I was really great and like worked really hard to get into a better sixth form, and I went to a Church of England sixth form thinking I was better in myself and my chances, but it turned out that they were just awful and hated me. And again, like the A level or whatever formal education it was that I had in art was just another experience of stifling creativity. And I would say it's only when I've gone out into the real world that I feel like my practice started to develop. So that would be even, you know, taking jobs as a waitress, working as an English teacher, and things like that. And I did go to art school, which was like so refreshing compared to school, especially like, yeah, if anyone's gone to similar schools as me, like the freedom and the like encouragement, the creativity, yeah, it was a real eye-opener. But the best thing that I ever did for my practice was I applied to this course, which was like a creative week, I don't know, thing. And I didn't know at the time, but when I got there, I realized that there was they had like preference, or I don't know, they'd made special considerations to make sure that particularly women of colour were accepted onto the course due to like disparities in like structural inequalities in Manchester and things like that. And that week was hands down like the most influential week of my life on my practice, because I met like-minded people. I'd never been in a room with so many other creative women of colour, and that network has been just so invaluable to me. Like we still have a WhatsApp group, we help each other all the time, we bounce ideas off each other, and that made me realize that the importance of I guess like finding people who you connect with and supporting each other, and not in a way of like, oh, I'll do this for you because you'll do this for me, but genuine people who can help and support you, I think is like the best thing for anyone going out into the world ever.
Thanks, Gemma. I mean, yeah, I think that thing about finding people that you can connect with is so important. And also for those reasons that, you know, not I'll do this for you and then you owe me one, but that actual ability to kind of grow together, to bounce ideas off one another, to be able to say things that might be a bit, you know, kind of like stupid ideas, but then for not to judge you on that, but then to sort of work through other stuff, I think. And, you know, and also seeing yourself in others as well is really important. People from, you know, who've experienced some of the same life experiences as you, so that you've got shared kind of common ground too. So yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, I think that's something perhaps to pick up with the cohort again later. Chris, I'll go to you with the same question, which again is like, what different kinds of learning, knowledge and skill sharing and lived experience have fed into the development of your practice?
Okay. I think, as I mentioned earlier, early kind of life experience, because I had a long life prior to doing art, and because I'm quite old, and so parental and cultural learning was the kind of thing for me. My dad was a carpenter, and I became a carpenter initially, but was not great at it. But hard work and understanding that grafting was a good thing. So I think being a grafter has been absolutely useful for me. I think you don't go into working with people in creative practice if you're not looking for hard work. I don't think it's a tough business. There are lots of extenuating circumstances that make it harder than just sitting in your wherever and doing your painting. So yeah, good work ethic. Also from him, I guess, I used to sit and watch him doing kind of woodwork at home, and that kind of attention to detail was maybe in me from there, I think, and having patience with stuff, and patience with people from my mom. She was a very caring person. I left school in 1980, and the miners' strike, my family were miners historically, and the miners' strike was going on, and Thatcherism, and after getting sacked as a carpenter, I was unemployed for quite a period. So all of that kind of burns into you, and you never lose that kind of anger that comes from that. And I still carry that today. In terms of the fight, I guess, I carry that energy with me. You know, the fight for fairness for people. And I understood, you know, we were poor. I remember my parents counting money, coppers on the table and stuff like that, you know. So I get what it is to have no money. I kind of grew up in that. I also worked in hotels, which was really useful. I was quite shy, I think, as a young person, although I was into kind of punk and all sorts of aggressive stuff and football and all that stuff. I was fairly shy and sensitive, I suppose. But then I got a job in a bar in a hotel, and that taught me people skills. I would reckon if you're going into this line of work with people, get a job in a bar. That's all I would say to you. Get a job in a bar. And you can cope with anything. The fact that I was in hotels as well, I did a bit of waiting on and all that kind of stuff. So I think I was probably always quite subservient, but I'm quite proud to be subservient and give service to people is not a problem for me. Some people hate that and don't like to lower themselves. I'm quite happy doing that. Another kind of emotional thing. My mum died quite young at age 53, which was a turning point for me in terms of change of life and career and what the hell is going on? What am I doing with myself? So that nudged me into the creative world. So that was a major influence. Then in terms of my practice, I think because of that kind of early kind of shyness, my stuff's really under the radar, and I, you know, little ego I had when I left university, I left that way behind. And I'd recommend that to you guys as well. Leave your egos at home. And so I love the kind of intimate little, we never got into group stuff or big things. We've done parades and stuff in the past, but it was never I never got energized by that particularly. I always liked the little caring interface between one and two people. Was always my thing. And because I've only ever worked on Brookfield, I've never been interested in anywhere else. I've done some commissions in Manchester, but you know, get me in and get me out has always been the attitude of that. And it brought a bit of wedge, but it had no meaning to it really. Although I met some lovely people and we shared some nice experiences. The stuff I do on the estate is like really meaningful every day. In terms of when I was at uni, I was only there about one day in a month, probably, because I was working on the estate. People I was into, before I went to uni, I was into Baroque painting. And I traveled a bit in Rome and Venice and you know, Florence and all around kind of Italy. And when in uni, I got into Jeff Coons for some reason. I think I liked his independence and his attitude. Although lots of things to hate about him, I hasten to say. And I got into Richter, but I also, as a painter, because I love painting still, and he's a painter's painter. But I also got into Wochenklauser, who were, I don't know whether they were Austrian or German, art group back in the day, who were probably still around. But at the time, they were organizing exhibitions for people from Eastern Europe, just to get them out of Eastern Europe. So yeah, I enjoyed that practical, give you a leg up kind of stuff. And I think that in terms of learning now, because I'm getting a bit, I don't know, as I'm getting a bit older, I suppose, I'm thinking about the future, because there's less of it to go. And I'm thinking a bit greener. I've never been a very environmental person, but I'm definitely thinking, you know, let's try and save the world. We should really try and save the world. You know, forget the detail. Let's just try and still have a planet in 50 years. But also cooperative ways of working I'm looking at. Because of the Preston model, which you may have heard of. We're very proud of the kind of community wealth building vibe that we have here in Preston, which is better than anywhere else in the UK, let me tell you. And we're going to become an independent state, I think, looking at the politics of the nation. But along with that comes stuff like, I went on a Zoom recently doing some training around sociocracy, which I'd never heard of. And it's a way of shared decision making. And it was absolute rubbish and completely inappropriate for where I'm at. If I tried to do stuff like that, people would just tell me to f in my organization. So yeah, I try to keep it appropriate to where I am. But, you know, try and keep my ears to the ground as well. I'm always learning. I'm always learning.
Lovely, thanks, Chris. And yeah, always learning. I think that's something to hold on to. And I have to say, I loved it when you said, get a job in a bar. I mean, I would completely second that. I mean, anything that sort of brings you in touch with sort of people on that kind of, you know, I worked in a bar, worked as a cleaner, all those kind of jobs, but yeah, get a job in a bar. And also that point about this sort of, you know, been working under the radar and leaving the ego at home. So some really important points. So thank you, Chris. Gemma, the same question to you as well. So what different kinds of learning, knowledge and skill sharing and lived experience have fed into your the development of your practice?
Well, yeah, I didn't really get into art much at school because it just wasn't particularly accessible for me. So music wasn't an option, and neither was really art as a subject. Has really been later on in my life I really got into art. So I went to university and did a geography and politics degree. So I was always quite into politics, but I found university really difficult because in those days there was no equality legislation to really stop discrimination, particularly for disabled students. There weren't really many hardly any other disabled students that I knew of. It was like a really small cohort of us at the time. So that kind of got me more interested in disability politics and looking at disability within a social model context. So looking at environmental barriers that disabled people face and seeing disability as a oppression rather than an individual problem. So that led me to get involved in activism groups, and back in the day it was quite a new and different thing for disabled people to be out on the streets campaigning around things like accessible transport. Well, through that I met other disabled artists, and so probably that was my inspiration, if you like, and maybe one more kind of interested in pursuing that kind of career, but it really, in all honesty, started as a bit of a hobby. So I got into DJing for an organisation called Great Music, and that really was a bit of a hobby. So in my work life, I was doing disability rights casework, working at a disability rights commission, and so that was my main career, and I just suddenly decided I don't really want to do this. Don't like casework. I don't like working particularly for a large organisation where you're quite restricted as to what you can and can't do. And I just felt like my job was really a bit of a glorified admin work. It was very admin based. So I completely changed careers and decided to go into the arts. Much to my parents' disapproval, I think they viewed it as a very silly move, because I had this proper job, you know, working for a government organisation, and to give all that up to go into DJing really wasn't, you know, on the radar. So, so it's, I mean, I would say it's taken a while to really get myself established and get funding, but what I would say is that being an artist definitely is, it's not about money, and it's really not about the, for me, it's not about the becoming famous. I think, like Chris, I'm very much interested in the smaller things, and working with community grassroots groups is very much my thing, more so than becoming particularly famous. So yeah, that's sort of how I got into it.
Thanks, Gemma. That's really kind of interesting when like the hobby sort of takes over from the career and you give that up. I mean, that in itself, I can understand that, you know, that your parents' reactions. Like, I mean, my mum always used to say to me, when are you going to get a proper job? Because I never had a proper job, and it was like the biggest point, you know, big main issue of concern for her was this kind of thing over security. So yeah, it does take, it's a you know, it's a brave thing to do, to say that you're going to kind of go down this route of being an artist, which refers back to also Chris and what Chris was saying about grafting. And if you're not prepared to graft, it's not really going to be the profession for you, because it's a lot of hard work, and, you know, with little money, and the fame doesn't come with it either, especially if you're working embedded in a community, you know, to any kind of degree. So thanks for that. Amy, same question over to you. So what different kinds of learning, knowledge and skill sharing and lived experiences have fed into the development of your practice?
Yeah, so well, I'm from like a small town in like North Nottinghamshire, like South Yorkshire way, and yeah, just did school. Some subjects I was great at, some I was at really high or lows, and yeah, I'd like worked at Asda, did jobs like that, and got an opportunity to go to uni and took it because I was like, this is my ticket out of here. And did a BA at Manchester Met, which was in film studies. So it was like the psychoanalysis of film. So a lot of theory on gender and queerness that I enjoyed learning about. And after that, even though it wasn't practice-based, my BA, I went and worked in like a TV industry for 1.5 years and like, yeah, bits of commercials and different things like that. Hated it, absolutely hated it. Found it really uncreative. Found it very, people stabbing you in the back, just was not the industry for me. And through that, I went and worked as a care worker and did that for a few years in different vices, like kind of going and helping people make their dinners, like their lunches, to going and working with young people for like 4 days, doing shift work with young people with challenging behavior. And yeah, I think through that experience, it really fed into like what I'm doing now. And at the same time as working as a care worker, I found out about the Islington Mill Art Academy, which was and still is at Islington Mill. So that is where I see me getting my art education. So it was really influenced by a lot of people around me. Kerry and Helmut used to come in and do some teaching for us. So I was really kind of lucky that I got to be in this alternative space. So not only was I at the Mill, which was, you know, it's like an artist studios for 50 people. You'd see gigs at night. There was just a real creative DIY spirit there. We'd also have people coming into the art academy, kind of helping us figure stuff out, teaching, but in a very loose way, and got to go and explore other people doing similar things. So that had such an influence over me. And I think that combined with doing the care work at the same time gave me a real idea of kind of social practice, or really interested in working with people. And I think that, you know, I know some people that have kind of done this art career that's BA, MA, PhD. And I think it comes back to this thing that we've all been saying about grafting and bar jobs, and that it is, I think when you're working with people, it is so important to have, you know, your feet on the ground and actually to know to work in like normal jobs. Do you know what I mean? I think that is really essential to some things. And I feel like throughout this, I've had different parts of me, I've led different lives, I guess, throughout this. And the knowledge that I've gained has really been, a lot of it has been through working with people on residencies, but also really process-based. So trying things out and doing things, and a lot about lived experience. And I think it's really important that, yeah, we talk about that as, especially as kind of like socially engaged artists, that is really important, that maybe isn't looked at all the time, but maybe is becoming more apparent. And also I really related to what Jessica was saying about when you went on the course and you met with loads of women of colour. And I think my queerness has come out more in later years. I think originally I was just working with people, that would be a lot of it, but kind of doing the Open Barbers project and other things recently is really connected to my queerness. And I think that's been an important thing for me to do. And yeah, I feel very comfortable in my community like that. So yeah.
Lovely, thanks, Amy. I mean, it's really interesting to kind of hear like how important those lived experiences are in the development of practice, and it isn't coming from a university route or coming from reading lots of literature about it, but it's actually being there with other people in communities, parts of communities, and you know, sort of working your way through things and trying things out, maybe making mistakes, identifying different barriers to certain things and tackling those. That's fascinating. Thank you all so much for that. So I'll move on to the next question, which I'll put to you first, Chris. So the faculty cohort, the guys with us today, have expressed an interest in knowing how-tos. So how to do something, how to have a conversation, how to self-initiate a project, they have many how-tos. What might you have wanted to know or understand when you started off that you feel is now central or very important to the way you work? and can help others inform others entering this field of work.
Thank you, Kerry. I've made a list. There's probably lots and lots and lots of things. The first one I put is how to fill out housing and PIP benefit forms. That would have been really useful because I've done shed loads of them over my time with people. How to listen properly. I can't, when you're a kind of ideas person, it's easy to, within a conversation, it's easy to grab hold of an idea too early. And I realized that I needed to become a better listener. At one point I went to I think it was only level 2, but a counseling course, like a night school thing, about 5 or 6 years in. And that was really good for teaching me, apart from realizing that everybody in the class needs some counseling, which is why they're there, including myself. Learning skills are really the proper kind of understanding of communication and the intricacies and the meanings behind responses and enabling questions and all that was really useful. So counseling level 2, go and get it. It's really good. And you might better your well-being as well while you're there. How to be authentic, which I kind of touched on earlier. People sniff you out, in my area. Don't pretend, because they'll sniff you out and come down on you fairly heavy. So yeah, being not so much because I felt I was authentic, but understanding how important being authentic was is a thing that I wish I'd have known more. Yeah, again with ideas, I put how to stop the flood of ideas and focus. I know, and personally with myself, and I know one of the big creative sensibilities I come across in people is that us hyper creative people love the next thing, love a new thing, want to be doing the next thing before we've finished the thing we've started, all of that kind of stuff. Because you can't let people down. You got to run the whole race. You got to finish stuff. You got to keep the energy going. You got to show that you're still interested 3 months into the thing you're making, whatever it is. Yeah. So yeah, keep a handle on ideas. Don't get carried away. Oh, here's one. How to find a partner. I'd been living there about 10 years and got married. And she saved my life. She didn't want to live on Brookfield, so I moved off the estate at that point. I'd be dead now if that hadn't happened. And I think because it was such an insular practice that I'm still completely obsessed, and I still spend most of my life there, and at the cost of my 2 kids and my wife over the years. But she's kept me sane. You were saying before about soundboard, I think, Kerry, and being able to kind of get feedback from people and talk to people and kind of offload stuff. A lot of the stuff I deal with is quite heavy. People, get beaten up, people get abused. There's all that kind of stuff comes out. And I'm not a social worker. I don't work with a bunch of social workers. I don't get any debriefing. My wife plays that role because she's the only person I trust to do it, really. And she's not in the art world. So, we have conversations about, football and furniture and the allotment and stuff. So time off from it is really good because I am obsessed. I'm completely obsessed with my work, which would have been to my cost, I think, long term. Now, I wish technology-wise, I've always used it because I do a lot of film and graphics based stuff on computers, but I wished I'd have learned to code. That's one of my regrets, because that's becoming more apparent that that'd be useful. So I might pick it up one day, but I've found it a bit boring in the past. And I wish I'd have got on the kind of green conversation earlier. That would certainly be useful now, because I know nothing about it. And I'm past the stage where I'm a very good researcher. So yeah, they're the things that, the how-tos that I'd have wanted. And some I've caught up with over time. But yeah, they're the ones.
Thanks, Chris. I'm hoping people listening might have been taking some of those notes, because you gave us some really good tips there, like, you know, to finish stuff and keep that energy going. So if you're on a long-term project, that can be quite difficult, and you know, you need to keep that energy going and to keep people on board with it and keep going in the right direction and make sure it kind of reaches its conclusion as well. And to stop those ideas running off. I mean, somebody once told me that ideas are 10 a penny, they're quite cheap. It's actually bringing them into the world that is important, and how you bring them into the world, and that like links back to, you know, that finishing of stuff, and that thing about don't pretend, don't try and be somebody that you're not, be authentic, be yourself. I think that is, again, so important. So thanks for those. I hope people picked up on other things as well with that. Gemma, next, the same question to you. So if you have any how-tos that you could sort of pass on to others, that would be amazing.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I've got a few. So I would say firstly, don't try and think your ideas about funding. So I know it's easier to do done, and we've all seen the funding application. So, oh, I could apply for that, but actually my practice and my ideas that don't entirely fit. 9 times out of 10, you won't get the funding. So, but equally, I would say try and be creative about where you get funding too. So, for example, when I got involved in the Untitled project, I just got involved in it as a volunteer. I didn't anticipate that in a year's time I would end up getting paid to do a soundscape about toilets, but I did. So you never know where funding will come from. You just got to really keep an open mind about it. The other thing is to not see competition as a threat but an opportunity. So if the artist who seems to be getting, you know, more work than you, but etc., to try not see them as a threat but more opportunity. Just find out what their pathways have been and how they got there. Because I find it a lot nicer to be working together and work collaboratively, supporting each other. Often what you find is those people have also struggled to get funding or get opportunities. So I would also say to, when you're working in groups, to be mindful of who you're talking to and what their communication and access needs are. So you really have to kind of set your needs and your ideas aside, if you like, and really look at where they're coming from and how you can make your practice accessible to them without being patronising, and it can be quite difficult. It's quite a fine balance, but I think it is doable. The other thing is So I would say take up other hobbies. Don't make your practice your entire life. I have made a mistake of many years ago. I was a festival coordinator, and the festival that I was working for became my entire life, and that really wasn't. It turned out to be that great for my mental health in long term, because then when I wasn't in that job, I just felt like, what do I do now? So always try and have some other interest other than your practice, and also to really think about boundaries. So I try my best to not take my work home, which is difficult. I know when you're working from home, and I'm sure people can relate to being really obsessed with a certain thing. So when I'm doing my sound art, I do become a bit in a little bubble, but I'm always thinking, I need to stop now. I need to have a break. I need to think about something else or do something else. So they're my kind of tips, I guess.
Great, thanks, Gemma. Gosh, that last one I would find incredibly difficult, to get a hobby. And I imagine other people in the room would as well. So where'd you find the time to have a hobby? But great one to sort of think of, and great for all of those as well. I love the one that the complication is an opportunity, and to find pathways through things. Lovely stuff there. Again, hoping that the cohort have taken down some notes for the other tips that you gave too. Amy, over to you as well about the any useful tips you can pass on to the cohort as to how-tos.
Yeah, so made a little list. So I've said to follow your instincts. What makes you feel good, it will be right. When money comes into your practice, it changes things, but try and make this work for you. If you don't make money from your practice, this doesn't mean you're not an artist. If you choose to stop making money from your practice, this doesn't mean you're an artist. I totally believe that. I think money kind of corrupts it all and takes you away from it. And there's times when you get really drawn to maybe something because it's a bit of money or a bit more money, and you do it and you just don't enjoy it. I think money can really complicate it and take the joy out of it. So it's really thinking about how it works for you. And I feel that there is this idea that once you get to a certain level and maybe you've been working different jobs and then you start making money from your practice, that, oh God, it's so bad if you return to some other kind of work. And it's like, it's not at all. We're just made to believe this, that we're an ongoing cycle and must keep improving. And I think it's crap, and I think it can be really detrimental for us all and our mental health. So I think that it's good to keep that in mind. And with that, I think, like, I've done like a larger scale project before for Tideway, which was this kind of creating a super sewer in London, and I really did not enjoy it. It put me off art in general for a long time, and it took a long time to come back from that. So it was a big lesson of like thinking about who you're working for and what you're going to be doing and how that's going to impact on you, because sometimes when you go down the route of those big money projects, you end up going back because you're just trying to get your headspace back to enjoying art again and being creative. So make things that you want to make, and more things like that will come, and just have a belief in that, because I do believe that that happens. Some practical things like stick to your day rate, be transparent about money, tell people what you're being paid, and hopefully other people will tell you, bring others up with you. Don't be afraid to say something if something doesn't sit right. Join a union. I'm part of United Voices of the World. Talk to people about your experience, share the knowledge and love. And I've put collaboration over competition. We're told to compete, let's not, you know, let's blame that on capitalism. We don't have to compete together. The most amazing things happen when people actually, you know, don't do that and look at alternative ways. And I've seen a lot of people do that more recently. Part of this thing called Solidarity Syndicate, where we kind of set up a way of using the Arts Council grants, the kind of emergency ones, the 2,500 ones, of then getting people that couldn't apply for it, maybe because they'd never done an Arts Council application before, because they are really overwhelming and inaccessible, in my opinion, to other people that might not be able to do it because of their passport, so different things like that. And then we'd shared the money out. And it's, you know, I'm sure there's some things in it that are quite wrong, but this idea of, in quite wrong in the sense that we kind of rushed out this kind of project, but it was just a reaction to things. And I think it is that idea of coming back to competing. We don't have to compete together, and let's look at alternatives. And, you know, we're in a time now where COVID's happened, it's changed everything, things are going to be changed. Like, I don't want to go back to what that was, so I'm very interested in looking at what are the alternatives and getting those implemented now. Another thing is, look where your funding's coming from. Is it ethical? Are the organizations, institutions you're working with on the right side of history, or is it for show? So I think it comes a lot back to my politics, really, and like how that sits within me. And it probably means that you're not going to make as much money, but I think, like we've been saying here today, it's not really about the money and becoming famous or the ego when you do social, you know, socially engaged work with people. It's about maybe deeper things than that. So yeah.
Brilliant. That was kind of like a manifesto, or maybe it should be a manifesto. That was, I mean, watching people scribbling stuff down. That, I mean, there's so many really rich points on that one, Amy. And if you've written it down, I'm just wondering if that could be sort of shared. And it also kind of links in with the stuff that Chris was saying, and certainly Gemma, when you're talking about, you know, just working on the project, go for what you believe in, and, you know, trust that money will come eventually, but, you know, don't waste your time necessarily over Arts Council grants, because they are so difficult and low chances, you know, unless you know how to fill them out and you're confident and you've got the right project for it. So lots of great stuff. Gemma, over to you for the same question. Have you got any how-tos that you could pass on? Sorry, Jessica. Sorry, excuse me, Jessica. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I actually did one of the Solidarity Syndicates, Amy, and we were successful and shared the money out. So it worked really well for us. Yeah, so I think really similar to other things that have been said, my biggest, when I saw this question of what were your how-tos, my biggest one's how to say no, because that took me a really long time to learn. Like, not even just how to say no to other people, but also how to say no to myself. So like, if I do see something like another application, but, you know, it's not quite right, or I don't quite have time, like, just say no to myself, and I have to physically stop myself from like going for too much. And if someone's asking me to do something, it's not quite right, doesn't quite sit well with me, like, saying no is fine. And learning how to say no was like my biggest achievement of 2019. And also, as much as I completely agree with what everyone said about, you know, it's not about the money and that sentiment, I really do agree with that. But at the same time, like Amy said about knowing your day rate, but also knowing that these, like, much of these organizations do actually have a lot of money. So like, don't be all like, oh, like I've done this in the past, like, oh, maybe if I say this it's too much. No, they've got the money, and if they want you, they'll pay it. Like, you know, these MPOs or whatever they are from the Arts Council, they get so much money every year. Like, whether they pay you 150 or 200 pounds a day is not really going to make a difference to their back, like, you know, their admin lines or whatever. And then my other big how-to is how to stick up for yourself, and particularly when you're working with groups, particularly with vulnerable groups, it's how to stick up for your groups as well, because this is a really important part of doing this work. Is you're not just, you know, if you're asking for something, you're not just asking for it for yourself, you're asking for it for a group. And so I've had it before where maybe like venues are not being as accessible as we need them to be, maybe they're not being as respectful as we need them to be, and really learning how to stick up for myself and my group was just, it was almost like a survival tactic, and it's not very nice, but it has to be done. And there's actually I'll just share a link, because someone who's done really well at this is an artist and practitioner called Jackie Tan, who was selected as one of the Centre for Chinese Contemporary Art, which is the only art space dedicated to Chinese art in the UK. Jackie Tan was hired as one of the revisioning artists that they'd like hired to basically make the organization not racist anymore. And now they've come out with a statement and a whole sort of action to stick up for themselves and, you know, the whole Chinese community, because basically they weren't treated very well, and it was all a load of bull basically. But this is just a really good example of how, like, especially now, especially after last year, like, we can stick up for ourselves, and we can and should advocate for ourselves and others. So I think that's my biggest how-to. And I put the link to the Instagram in the chat.
Brilliant, thanks, Gemma. I think that the toughest one with that one that I relate to is the how to say no. And if there could be a course in how to say no, that would be brilliant. But yeah, I think totally agree as well about sticking up for yourself and for your group, and for making sure that organisations and venues have the right access requirements for people. It's so important to kind of take those on board and shout out about them. So thank you. I realise that I'm not the most brilliant of hosts because we've run over, but I'm blaming that on you guys for giving such compelling responses and such generous responses. We do have another question, but I also want to make sure we have questions from the cohort. I think it's really important they have a chance to ask a question of you. The last question is, what have you learned from our recent times, and that you might feel important about taking your work forward, and also important for other artists too. So I think when, recent times, the last 12 months or so, but can we keep this one really, really short? Just a quick response to that, so that we do give the cohort chance, just like a one answer thing to that one. Tricky, I know, but starting with you, Gemma, what have you learned from our recent times that you feel might be important for your work and for other artists moving forward?
I think I've learned to sort of be more sharing. So I got all this council gone, and I ended up using it. People about always to collaborate with me online, because actually, to be honest, I really wasn't feeling very autistic at all during lockdown. So I kind of used it on my God to pay other people to do work, like in creative or all types of stuff. I suppose I've learned to be, for sharing.
Right, thank you. Amy.
I think, like, one of the main things has been, I guess, how Zoom's opened things up, and just thinking about accessibility, and need to be listening more to people who are disabled or chronically ill about how to make things more accessible. And I feel that that's more than just like hybrid events. Like, this is something we need to be rebuilding on, like, how can everybody be included? And that's not just around disability as well, but maybe how white the art world actually is, and how that needs to change. So educating myself more around this and putting things into action, and also realizing that I am going to get it wrong, but that shouldn't prevent me from trying. And I think that's what I've really taken away from this past 12 months, how by stopping and looking at things, and with everything that's happened in the world, how are we going to continue to change. We need to change now.
Thanks, Amy. Jessica.
For me, I think it would be like the importance of like embodied experiences to things that we can touch and smell and feel, like in conjunction with this new Zoom revolution where everything's online. I think the importance of actual like feeling things on our bodies and with our senses. It's just me, yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. And Chris, what you're learning? Chris, I think you're on mute.
We incorporated Zoom conversations more actively in the lockdown periods, just to stay in touch with people. So use of that as a tool going forward is going to be something that we develop. Just from the perspective that, because after a number of years we had a building, and you can get into the mindset of like staying in your building, you kind of, it's a way of virtually getting out there, but you obviously need to get physically out there as well. Do not wait for people. Over this period, the seemingly kind of, I mean, when I came in '94, New Labour were just coming in, and that, you know, eventually went so. But then we've had 10 years of you know who. So for me, the collapse of the political process means that local action is more and more important, is something that I've taken on board. So that's why we're looking at doing bigger stuff, because it ain't going to happen. Change is not going to happen through central government. And I guess one of the things is that we've just started reflecting a bit more, because in some ways you just, for those periods, you just had more time to think about stuff. Working within the community, there's always something happening that didn't give me that opportunity before. So the fact that, learning that the fact that reflecting is really useful.